Welcome to OHMM's special February webinar. If anybody's our January webinar that was trans-specific to HIV criminalization proved to be so popular that we decided to bring our friends and partners, TransOhio, to present a more of a generalized Trans 101, and they call it Trans 101. It's 2021. And we're bringing that today. We are offering CEUs. At the very end of the hour, we will be posting a link where you can go and fill out a quiz and an evaluation, and that will be the process that you need to follow to get CEUs. For Q&A today, we're going to be using the chat. And so if you have questions, just put them in the chat. It's possible that one of us can answer you during the presentation, but we may hold your question until the Q&A at the end, especially if it's directed at one of our panelists. I'm going to turn us over now to James Knapp of TransOhio, and he's going to introduce our panelists. James.
Hi folks, my name is James. I am Chair and Executive Director of TransOhio. First, I would like to say what TransOhio is and do a quick terminology 101 so we're all on the same page. But today I am joined with Darius Stubbs, who is Vice Chair of TransOhio, and Linda Cox, who has been a volunteer with TransOhio for longer than I have been involved with TransOhio. So she has been around for a while and has quite a bit of experience, and I will read their biographies a little bit later when they have specific time to talk in their section. But TransOhio was founded in 2004. We educate, advocate, and support the transgender and allied communities. We are most well known for our name and gender change legal clinics, which we actually partner with Equality Ohio with now, and also our symposium, which this year will be virtual and happening in September. Real quick here, I'm gonna share my screen so you can see my PowerPoint. There we go. All right, Trans 101, it's 2001, y'all. It is time for us to be on the same page in terms of Trans 101. I would like to first let you all know that now is the time to ask questions. If you have any questions, no matter how silly you think they are, trust me, we've heard them before. Please put them in the chat, or you can email me directly, james@transohio.org. You can reach out to Kim and she'll reach out to us. But please do not stalk the panelists on Facebook later and ask them personal questions about themselves or follow-up questions about today. Now is the time. All right. First, let's get into sex assigned at birth. I know y'all have heard this before if you joined us last month. Sex assigned at birth is what's listed on your original birth certificate. Everybody has a sex assigned at birth. Sex assigned at birth is an assignment and classification of people, usually as either male or female, and often based solely on physical anatomy at birth and karyotyping. Karyotyping is taking and reviewing images of an individual's chromosomes, usually to detect abnormalities. It is not done automatically, and also it is very expensive. So a lot of folks don't do sex karyotyping at birth. So when people online, you see the argument that there is male and female and that is it. There's X and Y and XX and that is it. Those people have never had their karyotyping done. So they can't even say for a fact what their chromosomes look like. I also included the abbreviations AFAM, AFAB, which stands for assigned female at birth, and AMAB, or assigned male at birth. Please don't use these terms outside of medical discussions, really because it focuses on people's genitalias, and we're trying to get away from discussing folks in terms of what their genitals look like. But when you see AFAB or FAAB, that's what it stands for. There we go. Now, who here has heard the phrase, transgender is an umbrella term? Everyone, right? Transgender and gender identity exists on a galaxy. y'all. Gender identity is how you feel about your gender. Gender expression is how your gender is perceived by others. For most people, gender identity, gender, and sex is the same, and we'll get into that a little later when we talk about the definition of cisgender. But what gender really is the internal sense of one's innermost concept of gender. Usually it's male or female, sometimes it's neither, sometimes it's both, sometimes it's other genders. Every single person has a gender identity, including you. Most people use the term gender identity and gender expression interchangeably, but they're not really interchangeable, because gender expression is how you choose to express your gender identity. It's through your physical appearance, through your presence, through clothing, hairstyles, even word choices, that kind of thing. But gender identity and expression doesn't always match up. You can't always tell someone's internal gender identity based on the way they look. All right, cisgender. Cisgender is an easy term to know. It is not transgender. In other words, someone who is cisgender, their gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth. Cis is a prefix based on Latin, which means on the same side, the same. Cisgender and transgender are neutral descriptors. One is not better or more normal than the other. Also, cisgender is not a bad word. I know there's a misconception out there that if you are called cis, it's a hate term. It is not. It is a neutral descriptor. It means you are not transgender. All right, transgender is the umbrella term, y'all. There are lots of ways to be transgender. Transgender just means that your gender identity is different from your sex assigned at birth. The most common ways to be trans, or at least what the media shows as the most common ways to be trans, is binary, it's trans man or trans woman. But there's also non-binary, which can either be a specific term or an umbrella term, depending on who you're speaking to. But non-binary means outside of the gender binary, i.e. not male or not female. And some people use this to mean in between genders, outside of gender all entirely, which is what agender means. Agender means you have no particular gender identity. There's also two-spirits, which is the Native American concept of having both spirits of maleness and femaleness. The non-native version of that is bigender. And there's also third genders in many, many cultures. I can't even name them all. Intersex is different from transgender in that it is a physiological condition. It's a general term used to describe a person who was born with any of several variations in sex characteristics, including chromosomes, gonads, hormones, genitals, and the way your body processes hormones that don't fit the typical notion of male and female bodies. Not all intersex people are transgender, and not all intersex people even know they're intersex. All right, I have some tips here to be an ally real quickly, but I also, oh, looks like I lost you.
I think James froze up for a minute.
My screen went dark.
I think you froze up, James. Okay.
Triplet, I'm having some technical difficulties. It says my camera is on, but I can't access my screen here.
So while they work out the, okay. So while they work out the technical issue, we appreciate your being here today. I know that there was a question for James, and I'll ask him this. Oh, now he's back. Okay,
Wait, no,
great.
It went away again.
All right. So let me tell you a little, while we're waiting, I'll tell you a little bit, if you don't know, about OHMM. So OHMM is sole mission right now is to modernize the criminal code around sharing one's HIV status. So, you know, it can be a felony 2 to 8 years if you can't prove that you shared your HIV status with an intimate partner. There are also several laws that create status offenses. So if you are picked up for several charges, if you're picked up for solicitation, loitering, regardless of whether you are actually guilty or not, if you happen to be a person living with HIV, there's an automatic upcharge from misdemeanor to felony. So it is a serious situation, and this is something that affects all people. HIV affects all people from all sorts of walks of life, including our trans siblings. James, are you back?
I am back. I am so sorry, folks. I don't know what happened, if it was just my computer or what, but we were actually just getting up to the part where I was about to introduce Darius, who is a poet, playwright, performer, vocalist, educator, and LGBTQ advocate. He's been living and working in Cleveland since 2006. He's on the executive board of directors and just got promoted to vice chair of TransOhio. And he's here today to tell us more about what it is to be transgender and his personal experiences.
Thanks, James. Hi, everybody. As James said, my name is Darius Stubbs. I live in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm a performer and educator, and currently the vice chair at TransOhio. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about my personal experience being trans. It's always interesting because I tell the story so many times, and sometimes it's hard to know where to start. I guess that for me, I was never confused about my gender. I've always known ever since I knew that gender was a thing, which was around the time I was 5 years old. I've always known that I was male. It was just sort of um, uh, how do I live my life so that I'm not being convinced otherwise? So that was really the thing that I had to learn how to navigate. I also grew up in a very religious household. I was brought up Pentecostal apostolic. And so in my house, we didn't talk about things like gender or sexual orientation. So I kind of had to do a lot of sort of figuring out on my own. You know, and I think that as I was going through my transition, I think the biggest thing that kind of struck me in this sort of plays to or talks about the intersection between being perceived as male and being Black in America was that when I sort of crossed that boundary between being perceived as a masculine female and being perceived as male, my interactions with people of other genders changed, and that was a big thing to get used to. I'm still not really used to it. I started my transition 16 years ago, and it's still something that that's really difficult to get used to. Where I used to, be able to engage with women and have conversations, there was sort of an ease, and that ease doesn't exist anymore. And so it's sort of weird being on both sides of that experience. But otherwise, I think that for me, because just because of my physical build and the way that I speak or something, my experience in transitioning and living as a trans man, I think is different than a lot of my trans siblings. I haven't, I don't usually get misgendered. I haven't been misgendered since before I started transitioning. And I would never get misgendered now. If I walk into a room, there isn't going to be a person there who doubts what my gender is. I don't really have to fight for that. And so I have to acknowledge my privilege in that, because a lot of my trans siblings don't have that experience. You know, and really for me, I usually have to come out the other way. You know, there is an assumption that I am cis, and I usually have to come out as trans. And that's always an interesting conversation. But I think that, you know, in that besides, you know, navigating personal relationships, you know, my identity as being trans really hasn't had a massive negative impact. It's really just, it really comes down to when I'm having a conversation with a cis person who is not aware that I am trans, and we're talking about trans people as a sort of a generalized idea, and having to sort of fight through and cut through that that inherent bias. That's usually where I find the most trouble. But you know, and so I think I want to say that to just to clarify that every trans person's experience is different, and I like to take, you know, the time, the energy to acknowledge that though parts of my transition have been tough, in general, I hold a lot of privilege, just because of the way that we in you know, uh, the Western culture perceive masculinity, and I just happen to fit into that mold. But I've been helping to advocate for and support trans people in Cleveland for about the last 5 or 6 years, and you know, I think we still have a lot of work to do. So with that, I'm gonna pass it back to
Thank
either
you,
Kevin or
Darius.
James. Thanks, James.
All right, next up we have Linda, who's going to talk a little bit more about being intersex. If you have any involvement in the gender variant communities in Columbus, you've probably met and big hugged by Linda. Linda is a transgender activist and educator based in Central Ohio. She's been a passionate and dedicated community volunteer since before I even approached the scene here. She's been involved for over 20 years. She's also a collector of trans histories. So if you have questions, she has the answers. Take it away, Linda.
Let me see if I can do this. Okay. I got something here in the screen. Okay. Anyway, I'm Linda Cox. I've been in the community for years. I guess you'd call me your grandparent. But anyway, when I started out in my lifetime, it was in the mid-55, 1955, and the doctors chose what I was going to be. I had an XXY chromosome, and the doctors decided to do the surgery and stuff like this. So I had some confusion when I was growing up as far as how I felt and stuff, and my body parts and stuff. I was very ashamed of them, and I always ripped my pants and stuff like that to make them into skirts and stuff, is what my mom told me. When I was age 4, she asked me what I wanted to go out as for Halloween, and I says I wanted to go out as a woman. So she put her nightgown on me, and of course back then we had some cold winters and falls, but she put a mammy cap on me and a Lone Ranger mask, so no one would recognize me. But that didn't matter. That was my theme every Halloween for years, and the neighborhood got to know me, and they didn't question. It was Halloween. You could do whatever you wanted to. But other times I knew, you can't do that. I mean, several times my mom caught me in the bathroom late at night with my sister's clothes on and stuff growing up, and she just scolded me and make me go back to bed. Thank goodness my dad was a baker and worked at night, so he never seen me. And he did catch me one time playing with my sister's Barbie dolls, and back then you got a whooping. And I learned never to let him catch me play with those. But I always knew that I was different than the other boys. I never got along with them on the playgrounds. I was always able to, at school, I was always able to talk to the girls and have a good time with them and stuff like this. And the boys couldn't figure that out because they couldn't get that close. But I finally, after I turned a teenager and puberty hit, that was horrid. So I tried doing what society told me I was supposed to do, as far as being a guy and marrying and having kids and stuff like this. And to this day, I don't know how I had 3 children, but I did. I got 9 grandchildren and 1 great grandchild now. So I guess life has been good to me. Been through 2 marriages, both ended in divorces when they found out, especially my last one. She found out that my transition had to go further than just the dressing. And a couple of years after that, she figured she'd made the mistake and she wanted to get married again. And I said that wasn't going to happen. But we lived our life pretty much. She lived in a trailer beside me, and that I'd bought and fixed up for. And we went out to dinner and movies, and did the same things we did when we were married. We just wasn't bed partners anymore. But through the years, I've had some problems as far as not being able to blend in, so to speak, and had problems finding doctors that could take care of me and stuff. When I first transitioned, there wasn't any Morel Cranes or any therapist out there. I pretty much had to cut my way through the forest, and went to Columbus State, took all the psychology courses that they had to offer, and I was able to get the keys to the locked library room down at the main library downtown. That's where all the books were at, and you had to have second semester of abnormal psych to get those keys to get in there, or be a therapist or something like this. And once I got in there, I found all these books, the Harry Benjamin books, and the Ellis books, and everything on sexology. And I found out that there wasn't anything wrong with me. It was society. And so I went ahead and started living my life. And back then we had different groups that we met called the Crystal Club. And we met in secrecy. As far as church, we met in church, we met in hotel rooms, we met in other people's houses and stuff, and guys from all over would come in, and they changed clothes, and their wives didn't know anything about them. It was a secret life. And of course they changed clothes before they went home, but at least it was a couple hours that they could sit and relax and be themselves. And back then we didn't have the term transgender. We had cross-dressers, we had transvestites, we had those types of words, which a lot of people now, feel offended by them. I don't feel offended by the older words. They go into more definition than transgender as far as the umbrella, term that we use now. And of course, there's more words being added to that transgender umbrella. I try and help people as much as I can. I've talked to, of course, I don't have a license where I can charge or anything like this. And, I tell people that, but, my life that I've lived through just about everything. And I try to explain to, people that are married that have their husband, feels like they're transgender. And I tell them, if you can get that happy medium and you can cross-dress and you don't feel like you have to have the surgery, and you've got an understanding partner, go for it. Whatever, everybody's got, a balancing act that they've got to go through. Everybody'd like to be able to transition on the job, but not everybody can. You just have to find out what you can do for yourself to keep yourself sane. Now, as far as myself, I'm living in Southern Ohio now. I ended up buying a property down here, and with a modular home on it. I'm loving it. I mean, I got to know my neighbors, and they've got to know me. They only know Linda, and that's all they need to know. I mean, I'm sure that they question something because I don't blend in, and I don't try to blend in a lot of times. Yes, sometimes I watch my, the pitch of my voice and stuff like that, but other times I could care less. I'm me. If people can't accept me, then, they've got the problem. I've had doctors that have told me, well, we can't do anything for you because of your lifestyle. We're not going to, help you, as far as any surgeries that need to be done, or taking you in and, as our patient. I've had hospitals that use me as a guinea pig. Once they find out that I'm transgender, they decide, well, we're going to use this person as a guinea pig, and we're going to, educate our people. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. So we try to avoid a lot of the medical people because they tend to be the ones that upset us so bad. It's not, I don't know whether they don't understand or whether they, they're trying to educate people and they're going about it the wrong way or whatever. I mean, several years ago, OSU had a similar thing like this, where they had the nurses and doctors come in like they did every year, and they'd always invite me up there, and I'd try and educate people, and I'd sit in the classroom, and I had this one group of nurses and doctors in there, and this one doctor stood up and says, well, we don't know how to treat transgender people. And I says, if you know how to treat a female as far as her medical needs, and you know how to treat a person that is male born, whatever their problems are, I says, all you need other than that is just a few cross hormone education, and understand that they're people, and not everything is an XX or an XY. There's so many different, variations on that. And also with the hormone fluctuations, there's so much hormone fluctuations. I've got friends that were born with hormone problems, and they were born a male, and they grew breasts because they had a hormone problem when they were born. The same thing with, I've got several female friends that have full beards, and they haven't taken any hormones in their life. But now I'm retired, and I'm enjoying life, and enjoying where I'm living at, and still get to, enjoy my kids, which, a lot of transgender people, they don't have family. All they've got is their chosen family. And sometimes that's the best family that's out there, is your chosen family. Because your birth family, they don't want to accept you. They want you to be who they want you to be. So at that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over and let someone else.
Linda, do you remember the first time you learned you were intersex?
That I learned that I was intersex, that was probably in the mid-'80s. After I got out of Columbus State, I had some testing done, and of course, I don't know where those records are at anymore, but I had chromosome tests done because I was, I had, I was told that I was born, and they had to do some surgery on me down there because I had a twin growing out of me. And there were so many different confusions and stuff like this, and my mom wouldn't give me a straight.
So how long did you think that you had surgery because you had an attached twin at one point?
Now, what was that again?
How you said that you were told you had had surgery when you're young because you had a twin. How old were you when you learned the truth about your surgery?
I learned that when I was in my 30s. I started questioning my mom because, my feelings for, who I was, and I couldn't express it, were so strong. And, at that time, that was during my first marriage. And so I finally cornered her, and she says, well, we had to have surgery on you because you had a twin growing out of you. And so I started doing some checking and stuff like this, and found out that in the mid 80s, I went to Children's Hospital, and it took them about 8 months to find my birth record of what happened in the operating room, because my family doctor and the doctor that birthed me was the same person. They had passed away, so all their records get burnt. And so Children's Hospital had a record of what happened in the operating room. And of course, today they probably wouldn't have that, because it's, you know, that's over 60 years ago. But anyway, well, 66 years ago. But anyway, I went down there, and I had my purse with me with my camera and stuff. And at that time, I was living part-time during the mid 80s. So I went down there, and they laid the record down on the table in this room. And so I walked in there, sit down, and they took my purse and my camera and everything like this. And I'm sitting there reading the record. And so, you know, that's when I found out that there was some strange stuff going on back then. And the second paragraph said removed undeveloped ovary and uterus. And that kind of really threw me for a loop. And so I had done some more checking and stuff like this. And that's when I had the chromosome test done. And they came back and said that I had an XXY.
Folks, the reason I ask is because many intersex people don't know that they're intersex until either puberty hits and they start developing secondary sex characteristics they weren't expecting, or when they try to conceive children and have difficulties. Some people are intersex and don't know until, or their families don't know until after they're deceased and there's an autopsy performed. But intersex conditions cross the entire animal kingdom. It's most popular in birds and, bugs and birds, but it also occurs in lions and other animals. So there's many different ways to be intersex. It is not as strange as people make it out to be. I actually had a cat that was intersex, and we didn't know until we went to go get him neutered, and he actually had internal ovaries. A lot of people ask the question, is hermaphrodite the same as intersex? And I'll be honest and say what you're thinking of is the same as what you're thinking of, but we don't use the term hermaphrodite. And hermaphroditism is actually having both functioning genitals of male and female sex that work, and that really doesn't happen anywhere. So that term isn't just outdated, it's also incorrect. But at this point, I would like to open it up to any questions. I lost my chat earlier when my laptop quit on me, but please, Kim, if we have questions, please read them to us.
Yeah, I'm going to start while we collect some questions in the chat with just a couple of you mentioned the concept of being misgendered. What does that mean?
So being misgendered is basically when an assumption is made about your gender by another person before anyone is asked, like you're not asked your pronouns or anything like that. Someone looks at you, makes an assumption, and then uses pronouns based on their own assumption and not based on your actual gender identity.
So Darius, what would you suggest for people so they can avoid misgendering people?
I think that in my experience, the best way to do that is if you are in a room with someone you don't know, is to introduce yourself and use your pronouns.
So if I said, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so if I said, my name's Kim Welter and I use she, her, hers pronouns, is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely. And if you do that, then you're more likely to elicit the response from someone else, and then they'll give you their pronouns, and then you won't have to guess or assume.
Great. We do have a question from Trisha Bath, and she's saying, Is using the word trans, so as the shortened version, an in-group term only? She just wants to ensure inclusivity through language, and she's encountered different opinions about that.
There are a lot of opinions on the use of the words trans, trans with the asterisks, and transgender. Trans is short for transgender, and it is inclusive. It does mean transgender people. It does mean intersex people. It does mean non-binary people, as long as they identify as trans. So you as cis people can also say trans without worrying about you're using some in-group term. That is the term to use. It's trans.
Right.
Also, I did want to point or make one other point. If you are concerned about misgendering someone and you don't know what their pronouns are, listen first. If you're in a room with them, someone else will be talking about them, and then you just repeat that. So if you're too scared to make an introduction, if it's been too long in the conversation and you can no longer say, my name is James, I use he, him pronouns, because you've been talking to this person a minute, just wait and listen and then repeat that back.
All right. James, I heard you use the phrases trans man and trans woman. I know that a lot of the people that I talk to get really confused as to what that actually means. Can you help?
That is a really good question, because even the media gets this wrong. And sometimes the media will say trans man, and what they mean is a trans woman. Trans man just means a man who is transgender. So I am a trans man because I'm a man. I have had transgender experience. I was assigned female at birth. I'm a trans man. A lot of folks in the trans community do have some opinions on the use of trans man as one word or as two words, or as using trans masculine instead of trans man. That's going to vary depending on who you're talking to and also regionally. But when you see trans man and trans woman, what they mean is someone who presents as masculine is a trans man. So it's not the opposite. It's not, a lot of people in the media say a biological woman who is a trans man. That's not what that means at all.
And James actually brought up something that is a distinction between trans man and trans masculine, trans woman and trans feminine. Now, the reason why those two terms exist is someone might identify as trans masculine, but not identify as a man. It means that they identify on whatever part of the galaxy spectrum that is not neutral or female, but they may not identify as a man. They may identify as transmasculine and non-binary. So usually transmasculine, transfeminine, those terms tend to be more inclusive. Trans man, trans women tend to be more specific inside of those terms. Just wanted to clarify that.
Linda, you had your hand up. Do you want to unmute?
Yes, getting back to the misgendering, people misgender me, more than they would James or Darius. But anyway, because sometimes I dress in blue jeans and have a bandana on and different things like this, and people look at you for about 10 seconds and they determine whether you're male or female. What I try to explain to people: don't use pronouns. Not unless you know exactly who that person is and and how they identify. Use their name. You're not going to offend them. The same thing on a phone. Don't use pronouns. I tried educating people at Huntington, at Chase Bank and stuff like that. They would call me up and have me do training with those people up there, because I can lower my voice a lot lower than what it is right now. But especially on the phone, what you hear may not be who's on the other end. And, when I tell them my name's Linda Cox, they kind of question me sometimes. But the thing is try not to use pronouns on the phone, period. Not unless you know that person really, really well. Write down their name, call them by their name. You're not going to upset them by calling them by their name unless they're, unless you call them Joe and their name's Sally. I mean, you've got to, be a little bit respectful to that person. When I'm talking to somebody on the phone, I don't use pronouns, not unless I know them. So, that is the, way of misgendering, not only on the phone, in person and stuff like this. Now, when they misgender me twice on the, in person, then I take it, I take it really bad. When they misgender me 3 times on the phone, then I ask for their supervisor. Okay, turn it over to James.
We have a follow-up question on this. I got a couple of questions lined up right now. One is, so my colleague Delaney and I both tend to default to they. Um, is that offensive?
Well,
Go ahead, Darius.
so I just want to say, to a certain degree, offensiveness is a personal issue. I will just say that. But also, um, I don't think that most people will be offended if you use a gender neutral term. And I think that, if you're, especially if you're talking about someone who isn't in the room, that's usually the the easiest way to not misgender someone. So I would say, in general, yeah, using they is usually inoffensive.
My partner actually uses they them pronouns, and as someone who does not use they them pronouns, the only way to really offend someone who doesn't use they them pronouns is to do it aggressively on purpose. And if that's what you're doing, it's offensive. So don't worry about making mistakes. If you misgender someone, usually you'll be corrected. Just move on with it and do better next time.
All right.
Now, as far as myself, I'm old school. The they and them, that plural as far as English language to me. I mean, like I say, I'm 66 years old. It's hard for some of us older folks to get that in, the thee and the them, and that in our mind when we're talking to a singular person. But there again, like I say, I try not to use pronouns, period.
Yeah, we have another, I just want to make sure Allison knows I haven't forgot her earlier question. I'm coming to it, but we're still on pronouns right now. Somebody mentioned that they're trying to make their workplace culture, better, and to use names unless they know the pronoun, but that there's some other phrases that kind of are problematic we don't think about. Like they were using, for example, hey guys. What do you think?
I mean, James just put in some good examples of replacements for those. I think that I would say, in general, when you're addressing a group of people, it's just better not to use gendered terms. And there's a lot of debate about whether things like guys and dude is gendered. I think that anything that sort of makes you think of one gender or another, it's safer to assume that it is gendered. And so, it's usually better or more inclusive to use terms like folks, people, friends. When I'm talking to a group of students who are usually children, I always call them my friends. I don't say boys and girls. I don't say ladies and gentlemen, because I don't know who's in the room, and I don't want to assume the gender of the people who are in the room. So I think that usually it's just better to go with gender neutral terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I was introducing you all, I almost said my trans brothers and sisters, and then corrected myself to say trans siblings. So it's an in the moment thing that I know I don't always do well, but I'm always trying to be better the next time. And there's several suggestions have been put into the chat. If you're looking, both James and Delaney have both put some stuff there. Linda, there is a question from Allison about, when you discovered that your parents and the medical community hadn't told you the truth about your surgery, how did you feel?
Well, I was kind of upset, but what are you going to do about it? I mean, you just have to go on with your life and try and figure it out. I mean, I've been adjusting my life all throughout the time that I was born. And, I just, and that's just like now. I mean, you go from day to day and adjust for that day. I mean, you don't worry about what happened in the past. Yeah, you can be upset about it. You can, but there's nothing you're going to be able to change it. Doctors and stuff like that can do wonders now with the surgeries and stuff like this. It's very expensive, and to correct that type of problem, and they don't know what they're going to find when they get in there. on me because of the surgery that they've done in the past. I've got scar tissue. They've done x-rays and stuff like that, and they do know that there's scar tissue down there, but what's left in there, I have no idea. But, you know, it doesn't do any good to be upset, you know, with them and be mad at them. That's in the past. I mean, my mother's passed away, the doctor's gone, all the surgeons and nurses and stuff like that were in the operating room. They're gone because they did the operation down at Children's Hospital. I wasn't born there, but it's where they did the surgery. But it doesn't do any good to dwell on that and be upset, and because there's nothing I can do to change that. I just have to go on from here, and I've had a, you know, full life. I mean, you know, and a good life. I mean, like I say, I've got, you know, 3 children, you know, 9 grandchildren and a great grandchild, and you know, and plenty of chosen family. I mean, you know, so I just leave the hate on the table and keep going.
Thank you, Linda. Couple of more questions. We seem to be on a pronoun and words kick this today, and that's great. So also, what about people using X on the end of words like folks, F-O-L-X, or we see that in Latinx. So there's a number of places we see that.
I think that will greatly depend on the group you're talking to. For example, when you say Latinx, if you're talking to native Spanish speakers, they would usually prefer Latin, which is an E on the end instead of X, because that actually goes more with how the Spanish language flows. The X in folks is meant to be inclusive of transgender people, specifically transgender people of color. A lot of white trans people have kind of co-opted the term folks and use it for everyone all the time in an effort to be more inclusive. But when doing that, it actually becomes less inclusive because now it's straight white cis people predominantly using it for themselves. So as an ally, I would actually discourage you from using folks with an X on it. But if you see it, that's what it means. It's meant to be more inclusive. And again, that will, the opinions on that will vary depending on region and who you're talking to.
Well, I just learned something new. Thank you, James. Okay, how about multiple pronouns? What's the best practice to use when somebody uses multiple pronouns, like Elliot Page, who uses he, they, is the example?
Well, I hate to speak for other people, but my partner is non-binary, and they use they, them pronouns interchangeably with he, him pronouns, but they would prefer they, them all the time. And they use he, him as a self-defense mechanism, usually, mostly because if they're presenting more masculine, it's unsafe to use other pronouns, and because she, her feels terrible. So if it has to be binary, he or she, they would prefer they. But they want they all the time, really. And that's really just their personal experience. Some people use they with their friends and he or she, a binary pronoun in work. And that could be because they want to appear more professional, and it could be because they feel more safe doing so, or it could just be because they don't want to have a conversation with people about what pronouns to use. But really my advice is to just listen, and if they introduce themselves with a pronoun, use that pronoun. But if you see he or she / they, lean towards they, because usually the preferred pronoun is they. Do you agree with that, Darius?
I think it depends. I've definitely been in situations where someone will use she, they, or use he, they, and say, it doesn't matter, just call me whatever. So I really think that, again, you know, James has given really good advice just to listen, because usually you will only find out that someone uses multiple pronouns if they tell you. You know, it's not really a thing that you can just intuit. That person uses multiple pronouns. Usually someone will tell you. And if they say, I prefer they, then use they. If they say, it doesn't matter, you can call me he, she, they, whatever, then, you know, go with your gut. But I really think that it comes down to, like James says, personal, personal preference, what someone wants. And again, sometimes somebody uses multiple pronouns and they want to be called they today and they want to be called he tomorrow. So it really just comes down to, like, being a human being and connecting to other human beings, and and being flexible, and just trying not to put anyone in a box.
And just having some social awareness.
All right. How about other gender neutral terms? So one of the examples here is having recently learned the term nibbling for a nephew. Sorry, I did that wrong. Nibbling for their brother's child. What are some gender neutral terms for aunt and uncle?
There actually is one, and I'm going to have to look it up because it hasn't caught on. But most people don't. I haven't seen a lot of people using gender neutral terms for that level of family, which is a problem with our language.
I have a friend who is non-binary who lives in Alabama, and they call themselves an unctie. Now, this might be see, unctie.
There it is.
So there you go. And that might be a cultural thing. I don't think that I know very many trans or non-binary people who are not of color who use that term. This my friend happens to be a Black non-binary person, but that's one that I've heard from them and from other people of color, particularly Black people.
Well, in my case, I mean, I've got grandchildren and stuff like that, and sometimes they call me Aunt Linda, sometimes they call me Linda. They call me by my name. They know that I'm their parents, dad, officially, but they don't call me that. I mean, in public, they call me Linda. Same thing with my kids; they call me Linda in public. I've got some grandchildren that call me Grandma, which is great. But I mean, that's just what they've adapted to. But as far as some of these new words coming out and stuff like that, like I say, I'm old fashioned. I prefer the older he, she. And if I'm standing there talking to James, I'm not going to stand there and, I'm going to call him by James. I'm not going to call him he. I mean, but if you're writing, a story or something like that, and you don't know somebody's, gender, then you write the in them, as is fine as far as writing. But when I'm standing talking to somebody, I'm not going to use a pronoun. I'm going to call them by their name.
And really, when it comes to, sorry, James, I don't mean to interrupt you, but when it comes to gender neutral language, like, we are all, as a culture, just at the beginning of the blossoming of the development of this language. So a lot of words that don't exist, like, a well-known term, for example, for being, a sibling whose other sibling has a child. Like, how do I describe that in a non-gender way? People are developing that language right now, right as we speak. So that's also something to keep in mind, that there is not a tradition of gender neutral language in Western civilization. And so it's being developed right now.
Right, and I was going to say I found the word, but it has not caught on, but I'll share it just for some trivia information for you. It's pibbling, the parent of my nibbling. Pibbling. I don't see that taking off. I don't see it outside of Reddit, actually, but use names.
All right. Linda, there is one question that was a little while ago, but you were talking about what your children and your grandchildren, how they call you. How do they respond to Linda in general?
Oh, they all love me. Yeah, they all love me. I mean, I don't get out of the house without getting hugs and kisses and stuff like that from all of them. But I mean, that's the nice thing about it. I mean, my kids accept me, and my children, my grandchildren, great grandchild, he just turned 1. So I don't know, too much about his reaction. I haven't seen him for probably 4 or 5 months because of this COVID thing. But all my kids, my grandchildren and stuff like that, they all accept me. I mean, my mom accepted me to the end, except for her Alzheimer's that was kicking in. Then she was having some problems with it. But Other than that, she'd send me a birthday card with my name on it and says, "I'm glad you're my daughter." I mean, you know, and my aunt, before she passed away, gave me a cardboard Oscar that's sitting up here on a shelf, and it's about 15 inches tall. And she gave me that one time, and she says, "Now quit acting and be yourself."
That's wonderful, Linda. It's good to hear. James, 2 minutes. Parting comments?
You know, I was just going to say some ally tips is start where you are. And when you know better, do better. You will, as allies, make mistakes. You will unintentionally misgender people. You will unintentionally use the wrong name. It happens. Trans people do this when talking about cis people all the time. It doesn't mean we don't understand gender. It's just a slip of the tongue. And sometimes there are misfires in the brain. What you do to move on with that is you do better next time. You don't have to make a big public apology out of it. You don't need to make a big Facebook post saying that you've learned your lesson. Just remember and do better next time. You have anything to add, Darius? Oh, I'm sorry, you went off screen.
No, I think that's good advice. I think also, I just want to say a quick thing about the word ally. So, if you are an ally, then other people will call you an ally. I would caution folks on announcing that you are an ally. It's like going into a room and announcing that you are not racist. Other people will start to think maybe you're a little racist. So I think, wait to be called an ally. Like, that is like a gift that is being given to you by people who live their lives on the margins, by saying, I have acknowledged that you are a safe person to be around. Right. So that is just my gift that I will leave with you, is to really let other people call you that before you own that title.
It's a good point, Darius. Ally is an action word.
All right. Thank you, TransOhio, so much for coming in and doing this special webinar with us today. We're going to put up the CEU Survey Monkey again. Adam just put that up. Thank you very much. And I invite everybody to register for our March 9th. When we return to the subject of HIV, modernizing the HIV criminal code, and our March 9th webinar will be a deep dive into what our proposed fixes or modernizations are for the current criminal code. We'd love to see you there. You can find the registration for that at ohmodernizenow.org/webinar. And we'd love to have you do that. Also, all of you who have been here today will get an email from me, a follow-up email with a link to the recording from today as soon as that's ready. So it's generally a day or two later. So I would hope to have that to you by the end of Friday. Thank you, everybody. And James, cue the music.